Back to our top story, a US politician and her husband have been killed in what has been called a politically motivated assassination. Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were shot in their home. Joining me live is US political analyst Aidan Smith. Aidan, terrible news this morning.
It's just beyond terrific. And I think that we just look at this in the context of so much growing concern over the rise of domestic U.S. Right-wing extremism. This is something where I think a lot of Americans who've been slowly waking up to the presence of this, frankly, this terror, it's just going to be a lot more apparent for so many people that this is a real problem that, if not stopped now, is just only going to get worse.
Meanwhile, protests, we've just been talking to Pete Stefanovic, who's in Los Angeles, protests all over the country today.
Yeah, and I think the thing with the protests that are really interesting is that when you look 8 years ago, and this is kind of a big theme in the early part of this Trump presidency, is Trump actually winning the popular vote this last time around compared to 2016. A lot more muted immediate protests. There was kind of less of a resistance in the same way there was in 2017 when we look back 3-4 months back. This shows that now Democrats across the country on the grassroots level, the common voters, are actually starting to really mobilize. And I think to me, it shows that even if there was kind of a delay compared to 8 years ago when, the shock and kind of really new almost novelty of Trump coming into office in an upset 8 years ago, that spurred pretty much immediate demonstrations. This is showing that it took, the grassroots among Democrats and liberal voters bit more to actually mobilize, but it does look that, some 5 months into the administration that it's finally happening and that there's a really strong and mobilized resistance to the Trump administration.
That is people on the ground. The problem for the Democrats is, as a political party, they are still, well, we can only really use the word shambolic from outside looking in.
Definitely. And I think the thing about the Democrats really looking now is that there's really such a massive vacuum of leadership. And that's why you're seeing kind of every other month or so a new Democratic politician, even someone who's been around for a while, someone like Cory Booker, Senate since 2013, ran for president in 2020, didn't really go anywhere. But you saw a few months back where he kind of made a big splash and kind of reasserted himself as a major national figure. And now in the last few weeks, you've seen Gavin Newsom, the California governor. He's been in office in California in some way or another, in San Francisco since I was a child. He's someone who's always been wildly ambitious. This really looks like a moment for him to kind of assert himself as a preliminary front runner for 2028, alongside, the Michigan and Pennsylvania governors, Whitmer, Shapiro, kind of a conventional swing state thing. But yeah, it's a case where there is such a massive leadership vacuum that we haven't really seen in American politics for, I think, a decade or so.
And the military parade with the backdrop of so much unrest around the world where the US is involved.
Yeah, I think the military parade is something where you've seen kind of among allies hesitancy to explicitly condemn it internationally. But even in the US and abroad, you've seen a lot of critics of the Trump administration argue that this is something that isn't really reminiscent of what's normal in American democratic culture. This is something way more akin to what you'd see in a lot of other, developing democracies. It creates a lot of fear around the possibility of a real cult of personality. And, whether one thinks that or not, I think it's something that will only embolden his critics further going forward. And these protests show that come 2026, there will be a really mobilized base of people to, if not vote out the GOP from Congress, give them a pretty good fight.
And obviously the scenes in Israel and in Iran, another sign of how Donald Trump and his administration are struggling on the international stage.
Definitely. And I think with Trump coming into office, so much of it was, besides obviously riding off of backlash to inflation, was the fact that under Biden, it coincided with a lot of things going astray foreign policy wise, especially in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And I think so many Americans who kind of voted for Trump this last time around thinking, oh, if we have a new guy in office, that means we'll go back to the 2019 status quo. When you see stuff like this, especially among Trump voters who are pretty non-interventionist when it comes to foreign policy, a lot of the steadfast support for Israel in this from the Trump administration, I think, is going to end up turning off a lot of, not necessarily his base, but among a lot of people who went for Biden in 2020 and switched to Trump. I think that there's going to be kind of an increasing amount of frustration among these types of voters who are going to be pretty key in 2028 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. It is quite the news cycle at the moment. Aidan, appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you.